My grandson, whispered, look under the table. And when I did, my heart stopped cold, and the blood in my veins froze, as I saw what no grandparent should ever see at their own sons, when it was June 17th. 2024 at exactly 3:47 p.m. in the Grand Ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton on East Market Street in Louisville, Kentucky, the sunlight spilling across the polished oak floors, casting long shadows, and reflecting off the crystal chandeliers, my hand shaking as I held my grandson's tiny hand, his eyes wide and innocent, and then the words came from across the room and cut through my soul like a knife. You spent 3 years saving every penny from your pension, every week setting aside exactly $142.37 for this day, every dress rehearsal, every cater meeting, every floor consultation, every table setting meticulously planned and executed. And they look at you with disdain and ignore you entirely. That was what my daughter-in-law said in that cold, sharp voice as she crossed her arms and smirked while the guests laughed around at the smell of fresh coffee still in the air from the morning reception, the faint scent of my wife's rose perfume mingling with the vanilla from the wedding cake. I want to say something, but my lips felt like cement and my voice like sandpaper. And then I realized in exactly 15 minutes from that moment, everything I thought I knew about my family and loyalty would be completely shattered. I remember the first time I noticed something was off. It was at 10:23 a.m. when I handed over the check for $21,763.84, covering the venue deposit and catering for 120 guests. And my son Matthew didn't even glance at me, just nodded distractedly to the planner and walked away. That small, cold nod now felt like a dagger in my chest as my grandson tugged again, whispering, look, Grandpa, look under the table. I bent slowly, my knees creaking under the weight of anticipation and the subtle warmth of the polished oak under my fingertips. And then I saw the folded envelope stacked neatly, and one peeked out with my name written in shaky cursive with a note that said, thanks for everything, but we don't need you here. And the words echoed in my ears over the soft murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the soft piano playing in the corner, the irony hitting me harder than a freight train, because just last week I had driven 342 miles from my home in Lexington, Kentucky, to deliver personalized carved wooden place cards that I had spent 48 painstaking hours crafting, and now it all seemed meaningless. I could feel my grandson's small hand trembling as he whispered again, why, Grandpa, why? And I had no words, just a hollow ache in my chest and the realization that I had been invisible in the eyes of the very people I loved most. And then I caught the eye of my old neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, standing by the buffet, holding her phone, recording the whole thing with a mixture of shock and sympathy, and I felt a strange warmth knowing that at least someone saw the injustice that had been done. As the clock ticked for 2 p.m. and the vows were about to begin, I made a silent promise to myself that nothing would stay the same, that this humiliation would not define me, and the room seemed to shrink around me, the fabric of the tablecloth brushing against my fingertips, the distant sound of children laughing in the hallway, the soft leather of my shoes pressing against the polished floor, all heightened my senses and my awareness that a storm was coming, not anger, but of revelation and empowerment. I turned slightly to my grandson and whispered back, I promise you I will fix this. And in that moment his eyes sparkled with a trust one had not seen since he was born, and I knew that in exactly 15 minutes the trajectory of this day would twist so violently that no one would ever underestimate me again. And then I leaned back, listening to my heartbeat thundering in my ears, the soft rustle of dresses passing by the aisle, the faint scent of jasmine from the centerpiece arrangements, and I realized that what was about to unfold would shock everyone here and change everything forever. And if you have ever felt invisible in a family gathering, if you have ever given your all and been brushed aside, comment below, because you're not alone, and wait until you see what happens next. I remember sitting in my study in Lexington, Kentucky on March 12th, 2021 at precisely 8:15 p.m., counting the receipts and invoices from every wedding preparation purchase I had made since January of that year, the stack of papers nearly a foot high on the oak desk, the faint scent of aged leather from my chair mingling with a lingering aroma of black coffee brewing. In the kitchen, the sound, the old clock ticking in the corner, marking each passing second, as I calculated that I had personally spent $12,894.56 on decorations, $6,732.11 on catering consultations, $4,298.72 on floor arrangements, and an additional $2,100 for custom linens and silverware polishing, for a total of $25.2539, which was almost half of my retirement savings that I had. Carefully set aside over the past 3 years, sacrificing small luxuries like weekly movie nights with my wife Karen, cutting down on our annual road trips to Gatlinburg, and even selling the vintage guitar I had restored in 1983, the one that played perfectly in every Sunday jam session with my friends from the Lexington Folk Club. I remember thinking that every penny was worth it because my son Matthew deserved the most beautiful wedding possible, and the happiness of my grandson Ethan was priceless. As I walked through each room of our modest home, visualizing the table, settings, a hand-sewn napkin, rings, of crystal glasses lined up in perfect symmetry, I felt a sense of pride, mixed with anticipation. And then came the first subtle signs that something was wrong. It was on May 5th, 2024, during the final dress rehearsal at the St. Regis Hotel on Main Street, Louisville, the hotel ballroom, glowing under soft amber, lighting the echo of my footsteps on the marble floor. As I adjusted the final chair cover, my daughter-in-law Jessica glanced at me with a faint roll of her eyes and muttered under her breath, "Why does he even care about this?" And I froze mid-motion, holding a silver candelabra, the cold metal, pressing into my palms, the faint scent of lavender from the centerpiece floating in the air, and I chose to ignore it, telling myself maybe I was imagining things, but the feeling of unease lingered like a shadow, following me everywhere. I then came to lunch at Tony's Italian Bistro on 42nd Avenue in Louisville on May 12th, 2024, when I proudly presented my meticulously calculated seating chart, printed in glossy cardstock and color-coded by family branch and friends groups, and my son barely glanced at it, saying, "Just put people wherever," and his tone, casual, dismissive, irritated my nerves. The clinking of plates and the smell of marinara sauce and fresh basil filled the air while my heart sank in silence. But I still carried on, believing that maybe I was overreacting and that my family would appreciate the effort on the wedding day. As the weeks progressed, I continued my preparations, driving 127 miles every weekend from Lexington to Louisville to oversee the floral arrangements at Bloom and Vine Florist Counting. Each rose and lily ensuring the colors matched exactly the theme we had chosen in March. I remember the sound of florist shears snipping petals, the texture of the velvet ribbons slipping through my fingers, and the faint perfume of peonies filling the air. It all felt meaningful, purposeful. And yet the subtle dismissals continued. A whispered, "Why do you care so much, Jessica?" crossing her arms in the foyer of our home, the rolling of eyes from Matthew during a phone call discussing the table. Linens, and neighbor Mr. Thompson shaking his head when he overheard me explaining the seating arrangement with precision, and a sigh of disbelief in the background. And I kept telling myself this was normal family stress. Maybe I was being too sensitive until the invitations were sent on June 1st. 2024, 120 guests, including distant cousins, friends from college, neighbors from our Lexington Street, and colleagues from Matthew's law firm, all expecting to celebrate a joyous occasion. And I remember checking every RSVP, personally marking them in my journal, noting names, ages, and meal preferences from vegetarian to gluten-free, with meticulous care. The smell of fresh ink on paper, the soft brush of the pen against the pages, and the excitement building like a wave inside me, because I knew I had done everything right. And yet deep down a tiny voice whispered that recognition was not guaranteed, that gratitude could never be assumed, that even the closest family could overlook decades of dedication. And love, I remember the summers of 1976 when Matthew was just 8 years old, and we spent entire afternoons building a treehouse in the backyard, the sound of hammer, on with the sawdust drifting in golden beams of sunlight, and the laughter of Matthew echoing against the fence, the same boy who now barely looked at me, as if the years of effort were invisible, and I felt a pang of sadness mixed with determination, because I knew that day at the wedding would reveal whether love and commitment were truly valued. And I leaned back in my chair, feeling the cool leather against my spine, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background, and whispered to myself, "Wait until you see what happens next, because what comes after this will test everything I thought I knew about family loyalty and human decency." And I promise you, as the story unfolds, you will feel the same shock and disbelief I felt. So stay with me and imagine yourself in this situation, and ask yourself, what would you do if your years of dedication were completely ignored? The morning of June 17th, 2024 arrived crisp and bright in Louisville, Kentucky, the sun hitting the streets of East Market like liquid gold, And I remember driving the last 2 miles to the Ritz-Carlton in my old but polished 2012 Lincoln Town car, the leather seat familiar under my fingers, the smell of aged vinyl mixed with faint vanilla from the dashboard air freshener. And I thought today would finally be the day everything paid off, but soon as I stepped into the grand ballroom, my heart sank. Matthew was nowhere to be seen. Jessica stood near the entrance of the room in a sparkling emerald green dress, smirking at the staff arranging buffet tables, and I could hear her muttering in that cold, sharp voice, "What a waste of time and money over here." And I felt the first real pang of humiliation when the first guests started arriving, 120 people all in black tie and gowns, some familiar faces from our Lexington street. Neighbors and old friends from college, some of them with phones already. Out filming the subtle tension between me and Jessica, my cheeks burning as I carried in the final boxes of linens and silverware in my hands, slick with sweat, and the faint scent of polished oak and roses from the centerpieces filling my nostrils. I remember Mr. Jenkins, my old neighbor and friend, standing off to the side, whispering, "Are they really going to treat you like this?" And I could only nod, because the first deliberate humiliation came at 3:22 p.m. when Matthew walked past me, barely glancing down, and said casually, "Grandpa, just put those napkins over there, and don't bother the staff. Our handling, everything is tone dismissive cutting." And heard by the videographer, recording every angle for the wedding video, the sound of her laughter in the background, soft yet sharp, echoing through the room like ice in my ears. And then it escalated. Jessica began to assign tasks to me in front of everyone, folding napkins the wrong side facing up, carrying silver trays with tiny scratches on the surface. And each minor mistake pointed out with exaggerated annoyance and a smirk. She said loudly for all to hear, "You really thought you knew what you were doing?" While the guests glanced over, some whispering, some filming the scene. I felt my stomach twist, and the heat rising to my face, the faint scratch in my wool jacket sleeves against my arms, the polished marble floor cold under my shoes. And yet I kept my composure. I spoke softly, trying to defuse the situation. "Please, just let me place these here," without anyone getting upset. And Jessica snapped back with, "That's not how we do things here," and waved me away like I was invisible. And then the first friend from the neighborhood, Mrs. Collins, pulled out her phone and whispered, "I can't believe they're treating you like this." And I realized this was no longer private. This humiliation was public. Every step of mine, recorded, every slight captured for eternity. And then came the icing on the cake at 3:33 p.m. when Matthew finally approached the center aisle and in front of 30 seated guests, and the wedding planner said, "Dad, you don't need to do anything, just sit quietly and watch." And I froze mid-step, the polished oak under my shoes reflecting the afternoon light, the smell of jasmine from the centerpieces now sharp in my nose, and the whispers of confusion rippling through the crowd. I could feel the tension building inside me, and yet I still tried diplomacy, saying softly, "Matthew, I just wanted to help," and he turned away without a word. The next 30 minutes were a relentless series of micro-humiliations, each meticulously timed, as if orchestrated the wine glasses I carried slightly rattled Jessica. "Gassed, you're going to spill that." And the chef and the catering staff scowled silently. I adjusted my grip, the texture of the crystal smooth under my fingers, the bouquet petals brushing my arms, my back stiff and aching from bending over the tables. And I noticed the videographers capturing every cringe, every subtle twitch of discomfort, every sigh, my heart pounding in my ears, as I realized no one in this room valued the decades of sacrifice I had made. The flashbacks hit me again, building the emotional weight, the 1978 trip to Gatlinburg, where I had driven 540 miles in a single day with Matthew in the back seat, sleeping on a blanket of my old wool coat, the smell of pine trees, and fresh rain in the air, the 1986 summer jam session where we laughed until midnight while I tuned the guitar strings by hand, the countless Sunday breakfasts, preparing pancakes while my hands sticky with batter and flour, the joy in Matthew's eyes. Those moments ignored, those sacrifices reduced to a series of dismissive gestures in front of friends, family, and strangers alike. I noticed several witnesses filming from the balcony, some neighbors from Lexington who had driven down just to celebrate the day, shaking their heads and whispering, "This isn't right." And at that moment the line was crossed. The tolerance I had carried for subtle slights vanished in an instant. My grandson Ethan tugged my sleeve, whispering, "Grandpa, they're being mean." And I felt a surge of protective clarity coursing through my veins, the polished floor beneath me seemingly vibrating with my heartbeat, the faint hum of the chandelier lights overhead, the scent of roses and vanilla mingling with tension. And I knew that the moment to passively endure humiliation was over, and in that instant I promised myself that this story would not end in despair and that what comes next would be the start of transformation unlike anything anyone in that room could imagine. And just wait until you see what happens in the next chapter, because the clarity and strategy of what follows will shock everyone, including me. As the clock struck 4:15 p.m., the sunlight filtering through the tall windows of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, casting long golden lines across the polished oak floor, I felt a shift within me, a calm clarity, replacing the storm of humiliation that had battered me for the last hour. The murmurs of guests and the faint sound of piano in the corner became background noise, my focus narrowing on a singular objective: to no longer be invisible, to act strategically and reclaim control. I leaned against the edge of the long oak table, the smooth polished surface grounding me, the faint scent of roses and vanilla from the centerpiece, mingling with the aroma of coffee from the earlier reception still lingering in the air. And I remembered the moments that had shaped me, my summers in Gatlinburg, driving Matthew and Ethan through winding mountain roads, the sound of the river rushing past the cabin, the smell of pine sap and wet earth, the laughter echoing in the cool air, the countless Sunday mornings making pancakes, my hands sticky with batter and flour, Matthew's eager eyes wide with anticipation, the jam sessions with friends in Lexington, the warmth of the guitar against my chest, the melodies floating through the open window. All these years of patience and dedication now crystallized into one resolute thought: I would not allow this humiliation to define me, and I would act with dignity and precision. I glanced at my grandson, Ethan, clutching my hand, eyes wide with trust, and whispered softly, "It's okay. Grandpa has a plan." And in that instant, his small fingers squeezed mine tighter, and a sense of responsibility surged through me that went beyond embarrassment. It was about justice, about recognition, about restoring balance in a situation that had been allowed to spiral out of control. I started with a quiet observation, noting every guest with a phone, recording every angle, every whisper, every subtle smirk Jessica threw at me, each snide remark from Matthew cataloged meticulously in my mind, the soft rustle of dresses passing by the aisle, the polished oak cold under my shoes, the faint hum of the chandelier above my head, all contributing to a heightened awareness. As I realized that patience and strategy were my greatest weapons, I remembered the legal documents stored in my home office in Lexington, the contracts for the venue, the deposits, the agreements with the catering staff, every payment meticulously documented, totaling exactly $21, $763.84, and a mental note formed: I would use these if necessary, but not impulsively, not emotionally. First observation, first strategy, then action. A deep breath, the scent of jasmine from the floral arrangements filling my nostrils, a gentle tug of my grandson's hand grounding me, and then the first subtle demonstration of hidden power. I noticed the wedding planner whispering to a colleague and subtly gesturing toward a laptop. I could see the schedule of payments and deposits, the arrangements for photography, the full financial breakdown, all accessible if I approached correctly. I realized that control had never truly been in Matthew or Jessica's hands. It had always been in the details, the contracts, the facts, the tangible proof of effort and dedication. And with this clarity came the first plan of action, not loud, not aggressive, but precise, measured, and deliberate. I would approach the situation using evidence, timing, and the power of public acknowledgement. I felt a calm surge of empowerment, knowing that humiliation had fueled clarity, and clarity would fuel transformation. The soft tap of the piano keys in the background, the faint chatter of guests, and the smell of fresh roses became a symphony of anticipation rather than stress. I glanced at Mrs. Jenkins from the balcony, nodding ever so slightly, as if she too sensed the storm that was about to unfold, and my inner voice said, this is a moment to shift everything, to claim the dignity that was denied to me, to turn the gaze of the room from judgment to recognition. And I started formulating a mental sequence of steps to reveal the truth, to ensure every guest understood the extent of my dedication and the misjudgment they were witnessing. And as I adjusted the fold of the tablecloth, feeling the subtle texture under my fingertips, the realization struck that what comes next will shock everyone in this room in ways they cannot imagine. And just wait until you see the unfolding, because this turning point is not emotional. It is calculated and powerful, and in the next chapter, you will see the revelation of true power and the complete shift in dynamics that will leave every witness stunned. And if you have ever felt powerless in a family gathering, ask yourself, could you act strategically? Could you harness the calm of clarity? Because this is the moment where the tables truly begin to turn. As the ceremony continued, the soft hum of the piano in the corner and the muted chatter of guests faded into a distant background as I calmly stepped toward the center of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, the polished oak floor cold, under my shoes the faint scent of jasmine, and roses mingling with the lingering aroma of coffee from earlier, that morning my heart steady, my mind clear, and my grandson, Ethan, clutching my hand, whispering, "Grandpa, do something." I nodded softly and remembered the folder I had brought in my briefcase, hidden beneath the tablecloth, the one containing every document, every payment confirmation, every contract signed in Lexington, Kentucky, totaling exactly $21, $763.84. From venue deposits to catering to floral arrangements, every single invoice meticulously stored with scanned copies and handwritten notes verify my months of labor and sacrifice. I pulled it slowly from beneath the table and placed it on the edge for all to see. The whispers began immediately, guests leaning forward, their curiosity piqued. The soft click of phones capturing every motion. Jessica froze mid-step, her smirk faltering, and Matthew's eyes widened in disbelief as I spoke calmly, but firmly, in a voice carrying across the room. "Everyone here can see these documents. These are the exact amounts I personally invested, every hour, every mile, every sacrifice made to ensure this day will be perfect for my son and my grandson, and yet I have been treated as if invisible." And the room went silent. The polished oak beneath my fingers grounded me, the texture of the paper smooth against my skin, the faint hum of the chandelier above, creating an almost reverent atmosphere. And then Mrs. Jenkins from the balcony leaned forward, whispering, "Can you believe this?" and started recording in wide angle, capturing the full scene. I turned to the wedding planner and said, "Please verify these deposits and schedules." She nodded with subtle surprise, checking her laptop and confirming every single entry with exact precision down to the cent as she read aloud the amounts: $12, $894.56 for decorations, $6, $732.11 for catering consultations, $4, $298.72 for floral arrangements, and $2, $100 for linens and silverware polishing. The guest murmured in astonishment, the disbelief evident on Jessica's face as her voice wavered. And she said softly, "I didn't realize," and Matthew stammered, "Dad, I thought the venue covered everything, and I had no idea of all this." And the power of the moment surged as I continued calmly, "For everyone to hear, these are not exaggerations. These are facts witnessed and verifiable. And now the truth is clear, and the injustice of treating someone who has devoted decades of effort as insignificant. Is impossible to ignore. The videographers and neighbors who have been recording every humiliation now captured every revelation, every gasp, every stunned expression." And the room shifted in energy. The soft rustle of dresses, the faint smell of fresh roses and vanilla, all became the backdrop to a profound transformation. The small group of distant cousins who had doubted the need for such meticulous planning now nodded in recognition, murmuring, "He did everything himself. How could we have ignored that?" And Ethan looked up at me, eyes wide, whispering, "Grandpa, you're amazing." And the clarity and dignity of the moment struck me as a wave of empowerment, a ripple passing to the gathered guests. And finally Jessica's voice cracked. She said, I didn't know." And Matthew's face turned red with embarrassment as he stammered, I misjudged everything." And the shift was complete. The dynamic that had held me powerless was gone, replaced by recognition, respect, and undeniable authority. The room itself seemed to breathe as murmurs of approval and astonishment filled every corner. And the planner confirmed to the gathered guests that indeed all payments were made and verified, every floral arrangement, every linen choice, every table placement, and the public realization set in that I had not only contributed everything but had done so with foresight, precision, and care. No one could question the effort, the intention, or the dedication of witnesses who had quietly filmed every humiliation, now shared the recordings among themselves as evidence of what had truly occurred. The subtle smirk of Jessica replaced by shame, and Matthew's posture shifted from arrogance to apology. And the first guest whispered loudly for all to hear, "This is incredible. No one could have imagined the effort behind the scenes." And then I realized the true power of this moment. The combination of patience, meticulous documentation, and strategic timing had completely inverted the previous hierarchy of the room. My previously hidden influence had become undeniable, every witness silent, yet aware of the reversal, and I felt a profound sense of satisfaction, calm, and empowerment as I looked down at Ethan, who whispered softly, "Grandpa, I knew you could do it." And I smiled. The polished oak floor under my shoes grounding me, the faint hum of the chandeliers above, the mingling scent of roses, vanilla, and coffee, a sensory symphony to accompany the revelation. And as I took a deep breath, I knew this was only the beginning of change, not just in this family, but in how recognition and respect would be acknowledged from now on. And if you have ever been underestimated in your own home and your own family, imagine the power of clarity documentation and calm, decisive action, because what follows next is the immediate consequences that will cement this transformation and shock everyone watching. So stay with me and see how justice is enacted in real time. The moment the evidence was laid bare, the air in the Ritz-Carlton ballroom shifted from tension to all the polished oak floors cold under my shoes, the faint scent of jasmine and vanilla mingling with lingering coffee from the morning reception. Every guest froze in mid-step, witnessing the reversal of power, as Matthew's face flushed red and Jessica's emerald green gown seemed almost to lose its luster in the bright afternoon light at precisely 4:47 p.m. The wedding planner stepped forward holding her tablet, confirming in front of all guests every deposit payment and contract verification, every floral arrangement, every linen order, every catering confirmation, a total of $21,763.84 meticulously documented, and the murmurs rose into audible gasps and whispers of astonishment from the crowd. Mrs. Jenkins from a balcony raised her phone, capturing the reaction wide angle, and whispered softly to the neighbor next to her, "Can you believe this? Everyone is recording now. Even the videographers who had been filming the micro-humiliations earlier now pivoted to capture the stunned faces of those who had underestimated me, and I watched as the first consequences unfolded in real time. Matthew approached me, his voice shaking. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't see what you did. I didn't realize." And I nodded calmly, acknowledging the apology, without raising my voice, the subtle texture of the papers still under my fingers grounding me. "Jessica," stammered I misjudged everything," and several guests leaned forward whispering, "This is unbelievable, the culmination of 3 years of planning and investment being publicly recognized." And then the first formal consequence emerged. The head of the catering staff walked up and confirmed publicly that Jessica's mismanagement of assignments and dismissive instructions had caused minor delays and errors that would have been avoided if my guidance had been followed. They quietly listed exact timings of mishandled trays, minor mix-ups in orders, and pointed to video timestamps already on the hotel server, and the audience murmured in shock. The polished oak under my shoes cold against my soles, the soft rustle of gowns, and the subtle hum of chandeliers above every sensory detail amplifying the weight of justice. As Matthew stepped aside to allow me to address the guests, I calmly said, "Everyone here witnessed the effort, the dedication, the sacrifices made, and now the consequences are visible and irreversible. From this point forward, the planning, the responsibility, and the recognition rests with those who honor dedication and integrity." The guests whispered and nodded. Several neighbors who had been quietly filming whispered in agreement while shaking their heads in disbelief. And I noticed Ethan standing a little taller, clutching my hand, eyes wide with pride. The first immediate systemic change was Jessica being reassigned by the planner from coordination of table service to overseeing minor decor adjustments under direct supervision to prevent further mistakes. The subtle humiliation of her previous arrogance evident in her downcast eyes, and whispered apologies as she accepted the correction. The second consequence, Matthew publicly acknowledged in front of family and friends the full extent of my contributions, issuing a verbal statement of recognition, confirming each item from floral arrangements to linens to deposits, and the murmurs of approval from the audience were palpable. A neighbor whispered, "This is exactly what should have happened," and several cousins who had doubted my meticulous planning nodded in silent respect. The third consequence came as a broader lesson. For everyone present, the videographers who had recorded the earlier slights now edited the footage into a timeline, showing the contrast between humiliation and revelation, and began sharing it discreetly with attendees and via private messages, creating a ripple effect of awareness and empathy. The polished oak floor beneath me grounding each step I took as I calmly observed the shift in the room, the subtle smell of roses and vanilla, the faint hum of chandelier lights, and the soft rustle of fabric. The transformation, complete, the invisible authority I had carried quietly for decades, now undeniable, recognized, and respected. And then the final immediate consequence unfolded as Matthew approached me again, whispering, "Dad, thank you for showing everyone what dedication truly means." And I smiled, the faint pressure of my grandson's hand squeezing mine, reinforcing the power of legacy and respect. The guests continued whispering, shocked and impressed by the meticulousness and calm composure with which the situation had been handled. The small group of Lexington neighbors who had traveled down nodded, knowingly capturing the moment on phones, and quietly sharing in awe of the visible justice and the strategic empowerment. And as I stepped back to allow the final arrangements to precede the soft clinking of glasses, the faint aroma of fresh roses, the warm sunlight filtering through tall windows, every detail reinforcing the lesson of recognition, preparation, and dignity, I knew that the humiliation that began just hours earlier had been fully reversed and transformed into an enduring respect for dedication and effort. And if you have ever felt powerless or invisible in your own family or workplace, imagine the power of calm strategy, precise documentation, and timing, because justice can happen in real time. And what you will see next is the permanent transformation and the reflection that will inspire anyone who has ever been overlooked to reclaim their dignity and voice in a lasting way. So stay with me for the final chapter. As the final notes of the piano floated gently through the Ritz-Carlton Ballroom in Louisville, Kentucky at exactly 5:12 p.m., the sunlight casting long, warm lines across the polished oak floors and the faint scent of roses and vanilla still mingling with the lingering aroma of coffee from earlier, the room settled into a quiet reverence. I felt a profound sense of accomplishment, calm, and empowerment, my grandson Ethan tugging gently at my hand, whispering, "Grandpa, you did it," and I smiled, feeling the warmth of his trust and admiration, the decades of dedication, the sacrifices of countless Sunday mornings making pancakes and jams, the summers driving hundreds of miles for projects, the countless hours of meticulous planning, every dollar and every effort now publicly recognized, all crystallized into a permanent transformation, not just for me, but for everyone present. Matthew approached and placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice sincere and unshakable. "Dad, I see now what dedication really means, and I will never take your efforts for granted again." And Jessica quietly stood nearby, whispering, "I misjudged everything, and I understand the weight of your commitment." And the audience murmured in agreement, heads nodding, eyes wide with astonishment and respect. The guests who had earlier witnessed micro-humiliations now whispered in solidarity, some filming from memories, some sharing quietly in awe of the dignity with which the situation had been handled, the polished oak floor under my feet grounding. Every moment, the subtle hum of the chandelier above the faint rustle of gowns and suits, the mingling scents of floral arrangements and vanilla from the cake, creating a sensory symphony reinforcing the permanence of this transformation. I reflected on the lesson, universal, yet deeply personal, that effort without recognition can feel invisible, but clarity, strategic action, and calm resolve can reclaim dignity and shift the balance of power forever, that even in situations where arrogance and dismissal appear insurmountable, the combination of patience, evidence, and composed confrontation can turn humiliation into empowerment and inspire those who witness it to honor dedication and integrity. From this day forward, I knew that my presence would never again be underestimated in my family or social circle, and the systemic change was tangible. Not only had Jessica been reassigned a task that respected the limits of her competence, Matthew had publicly acknowledged my contributions, and the videographers and neighbors who had captured everything now shared these lessons discreetly, reinforcing a culture of recognition and accountability among friends, family, and even colleagues. Present the soft clinking of glasses, the distant hum of conversation, the warmth of the sunlight streaming through the windows, the texture of the polished oak under my fingertips, all served as reminders of the journey from invisibility to empowerment. My grandson Ethan now standing a little taller beside me, whispering, "Grandpa, everyone saw what you did." And I whispered back calmly with pride, "Yes, Ethan, they did." And that moment crystallized the most important truth. The transformation was not merely social. It was emotional, psychological, and deeply personal. And the reverberations would continue long after the wedding, the audience inspired and reflective, some nodding thoughtfully, others quietly taking notes in their minds. The subtle power of preparation and evidence creating ripples beyond the room. The CTA was implicit yet crucial. If you have ever felt invisible, undervalued, or dismissed, imagine the power of clarity, strategic action, and patience in reclaiming dignity and influence. Engage with your own life, act with intention, and remember that recognition can be created, not just awaited. And as I stood, the faint smell of roses still lingering, the soft warmth of the sun on my face, the gentle grasp of my grandson's hand, the polished oak beneath my feet, the soft rustle of fabric around me, I realized the final lesson. The permanent transformation was within myself, the empowerment permanent, the respect undeniable, and the connection strengthened across family and community. And now it is your turn to reflect on your own moments of invisibility. Ask yourself where you can act with dignity and evidence reclaim control in situations that seem hopeless, because empowerment is always within reach. And as the guests quietly departed, their whispers and glances filled with newfound respect and recognition, I took a deep breath, the faint hum of the chandeliers above, the aroma of roses, vanilla, and lingering coffee grounding me, and whispered softly to myself, and anyone listening, you are never too late to reclaim your voice, your dignity, your influence, and your power. So comment below if you've ever felt overlooked. Share this story with someone who needs to see that dignity and recognition can be reclaimed. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that inspire engagement and empowerment. Activate the bell to join a community of those who believe in taking control of their own narrative, and leave your reflections below, because your journey matters. And remember, every act of patience, clarity, and strategic action can transform humiliation into empowerment. And this day at the Ritz-Carlton, Louisville, Kentucky, would forever be remembered as the moment where invisibility ended and recognition began.